Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode. I'm here today with Julia Bastian, VP of Product at Alasco, which is a software as a service prop tech company, which I would really love to know more about the industry, so we'll probably explore that in a minute. But also as an interesting fact, she climbed to this VP of Product position coming from UX research, which I think is not a very usual path, but a very interesting one. So I will also like to explore more about that. But before doing any other spoiler, Julia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nacho. Happy to be here. So this is my first podcast ever, so I'm really excited and honored to be here with you today.
That's awesome. That's awesome because we are trying to capture kind of the voices of the product leaders out there in the field doing this hard work of strategy. So it's glad to have you. And I would like to maybe start by giving you the chance to introduce you a bit more than the words I said, and maybe give us a word of where you're coming from and also a bit about Alasco and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Julia, just like you said, and I'm from Munich. And I work at Alasco as VP Product, where we follow the mission to digitalize the second biggest industry in the world, the construction industry. And just like you said, let's start at the beginning. So from my background, I'm actually a business psychologist and a systemic coach. And back then, I would have never thought that I end up in product management, like many people, I think. And I wouldn't have really known what product management is. So I started my career off as innovation consultant and helped big corporates in early product discovery and market validation, where I was always curious about asking questions and researching things. So this really helped me to get deep into that and into a whole bunch of different products, which was really interesting. Nevertheless, after some time, I just realized if the mindset is not there in those corporates, you can't really make a difference. And also I felt I wanted to be there for the execution as well, because if you only do discovery and then you go out, discovery is not done that. So you still need to continue. So that's how I kind of decided to switch and looked for a startup. And I came across Alasco, which was back then 20 people. And the founders are pretty well known in Munich community because they have already founded Stylight, another company that they have made an exit, which was kind of cool because I liked that they already had a maturity in the organization and how they work a company. And I was really curious about the construction industry because I like complex matters and like to get deep into there. And yes, just like you said, I started as UX researcher. And then somehow I ended up to become VP product of a company with 130 people right now. And I would have never thought of that back then.
That's super awesome. And by the way, when you were getting into this company, the title UX researcher is something that you already knew. So you know what you were signing up for, or was also that part of the journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I just applied there and didn't really know for the role. I just told them, hey, that's how I would do product discovery and market research. And I didn't know what the role could be called. And they didn't know either. When I came to my first interview, I came with a drawing of how I understand the industry and what they are doing, and ask them, is that right? Is that working? How Alasco is positioned on the market? And that's kind of how I started. And then I think now I know it, the founders sit together and said, okay, we should get her, what role could we give her? How can we call that? And I think they researched and put down UX researcher, and I researched as well. And that's how I kind of started. So I was the first person, or I was obviously the first researcher, but in the team back then, it was just the founder who was head of product back then, one product manager and me, and then of course the engineering team. And yes, that's how all of that started off.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. And maybe just to get our feet on the ground, what's Alasco more completely doing? What type of problems are you solving, or what's the problem about? Because you mentioned the construction industry, which is pretty big, so maybe a bit more precise.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So with Alasco, we kind of started off with like the whole cost controlling of construction projects. You can imagine like there are so many construction projects out there that are not good managed in time and also costs. Like I think more than 60% or 80% of construction projects are more than budgeted in the beginning. And a lot of the things also depend on the processes, how they do it, and they don't have real transparency on that data. So this is what we started off. And now we came more and more to the sustainability management of construction projects and real estate in general. And that's kind of where we're going now. Like we think the success of the industry and the real estates and the asset managers and project developers who are our target customers, they really depend on bringing costs, revenues, and sustainability together. And that's where the success for them in the business model in the end lies.
Very, very interesting. Okay. So maybe that can be a good path forward to our typical beginning of the interview, in which I ask you about the last time you formulated a strategy. So maybe give us a hint on how this, I'm not sure if this is when you step up as PP product or maybe a recent strategy process. What can you tell about the process, the tools, the frameworks you use, and how this come to life?
Sure. So actually that's pretty fresh in my mind, or is still in my mind, because we're just finishing up on our strategy process that we just had over the last couple of months. So yes, so actually we did like a whole big, huge strategy research over the last couple of months, because a lot of things in the industry changed. And also we launched a new product beginning of the year. We didn't know how that worked out. So we also needed to evaluate a lot of things and say, okay, do we change what we thought over the last years a little bit? Do we adapt? And we wouldn't have been really able to execute next year if we wouldn't have made those decisions. So for us, this was like a huge thing. And how did we start? So the strategy process was led by our CEO, and I was like supporting him process-wise, and also because a lot of the knowledge is lying in product. So it was the two of us like guiding through the process. And we kind of started off first with like the processes and the stakeholders, like because if you don't start by designing a process, what is done when and what do you want to reach at what point, you kind of get lost in the process. So I feel like defining that beforehand, before you get into the content, is really important. And also like knowing which stakeholders you involve, because the expertise doesn't lie with the people that sometimes make the strategy. It lies with like the product managers and the people on the go-to-market people. So you needed to find a good way to include them in the different phases. And we had like a bottom-up and top-down approach. So we always switched on who's like now involved, what is the next phase, and what we're doing. Like that's said in a nutshell.
That sounds super structured, but that's super interesting, because I feel that not that many companies are doing this in a very structured way. But how these phases look like? I mean, which one are kind of the steps in there?
Yeah, so we differentiated in the process between kind of two approaches. So that's not from a book or anything. That's just how I call it. It's on the one side, we call it evaluative approach, because I think there's always in each company hypothesis that everyone kind of talks about. And those narratives can be super useful if you want to continue walking in this direction, but they can be super hindering if you want to change direction. So the first thing we did is like really see what are all those opportunities people tell each other in the company right now. And we started off with those and evaluated them, like pretty much on what does it mean on the market, how big would be the market, what would be the business opportunity behind it, what problem would we solve, like just looking at it from different perspectives.
A more tactical question, where those were kind of collected? It was kind of, I don't know, big Miro board, a big document. What kind of artifact do you use to collect all these ideas and write them down?
Actually, it was a Miro board. And it was like all of us from the management coming together and ideating on that. But of course, every one of us asked their people before. And most of the things were pretty obvious for us anyway, because it's the things we talked about the whole last year. So yeah, it wasn't like new ideation, but getting everything on the paper.
And the evaluation was more based on existing data, right? So as you said, market data or past users.
Perfect. Yes, and we from the management didn't do the research. We like had then opportunity leads who like researched on the different things. So they like looked in the market data and they presented it every 3 weeks, and then we asked questions again, and they went out in the market again, talked to customers, and since we are an industry where like it takes a long time to evaluate things, it's not that we had the answer in the end, but even the opportunity in the end could be, hey, it's worth going deeper into that, and we should invest time for research the next year. So even that could have been an out, or is an outcome of our strategy process.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So that's evaluation.
Yes, that's the evaluative approach, and then we called it generative approach. So that was more for us like, hey, let's look at market again. Things are changing economically out there. What does that mean for our business model? What does that mean on how people work with our product? Do problems change, or do other problems become severe on the market? And that's kind of how we looked at it, like from the top and like the big picture, without having Alasco in detail in mind. So, and we like combined those two parts then, and like figured out if like also from the generative research, new opportunities that are worth evaluating come out.
Yeah, and I'm perceiving that you are oversimplifying that it's quite complex to get into these nuggets of information. Maybe who was involved, what kind of information were you looking at? Maybe a result of an insight. I mean, did you put it in the same Miro board, or how the artifact collaborated there?
Yeah, so actually it was a whole bunch of people involved. So we also had from our investors, consultancies involved that helped us with market data, because sometimes it's really hard to like really cut through the construction market with data. Like I still feel like some things we just don't know. So it's always something we learn, and then we ask other questions after some time, and then the market data gets more clear for us. Then we had a chief of staff that is supporting the whole management team that did a lot of the research, and also we from the product team supported with things we knew from insights, and also like we were gathering continuously insights from our customers. Yeah. So it was also like including those into the research.
Okay, perfect. Makes sense. So now we have big bunch of insights. What do we do next? It sounds complex already.
Yeah, then it was about going deeper into decisions, and of course this is also, and that's also the tricky part of a strategy process. First, I think in general, a strategy process like this is a discovery process. Mm-hmm. And a discovery process is always chaotic and messy, and it's never like a perfect process. So, and I think that's okay, and I think that's even good. Like, I think you need to go through ups and downs during the process. You need to feel tensions and conflicts and different opinions and perspectives, because in between those tensions, there lies the real strategy and where you really need to go. And I think that's just like in general one thing that I think is really important. And of course, as soon as it comes to a decision, the tensions get even harder, and like the opinions of different groups, and like this is where you need to really manage through. But in the end, for all of us, like with the data in front of us, it was pretty clear what to do. Like there were like different opinions in the details, but on the overlying strategy and with the vision in mind, I think we already had a good guidance, and then we were able to decide on things.
Perfect. So I'm imagining that, are you selecting on this whole bunch of insights that you have from the previous exercise, or was more like, I don't know, for example, grouping and affinity mapping and selecting an area of opportunities, or maybe it's just kind of guide us through how the selection work?
Yeah, you're right. So I think in general, like if we have like from in product, you always have a lot of insights coming from go-to-market, from customer success, from like even just interviews product managers do, and how like we don't group those insights based on a strategy right away. We more group them on like the domain, because strategy can always change a little bit, and this would always influence on how we would have to manage our insights. And we do it with product board just as a tool, which really helps. And I also think it helps to have those insights really clear and not interpreted right away. Because if you have an insight from a customer, it's not about the insight, it's about the problem that lies behind that. And so it's so important that the product managers process all of those insights, and during the processing, they learn a lot and find patterns. And those insights and patterns, that's what I need for my strategy process. So it's not the detailed insights, but it's the patterns and things product managers or the head of product finds out during this process. And all of this needs to be included in the strategy process. And I think this best gets included if people are in there that have an opinion on things and discuss with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
I'm thinking how we can do this, because I'm trying to ask for an example, but maybe an example of this passing strategy is too recent to share. But maybe do you have a previous one, maybe in a previous strategy that you can share, for example, an example of these insights that turn out into to be a pattern, and then how this pattern looked in the strategy side?
yeah, so actually, just to clarify, like how we work there, because I can't match the insight directly to the strategy. So how we do it is like we have opportunities. So an opportunity for us is for example, to go more into sustainability management. I like make it really abstract right now. Like how can we measure CO2 emission for construction projects? This could be like our opportunity working on. And then there are initiatives underneath that we have, like, for example, we want to have good reporting on the portfolio of assets. And then under the initiatives, there are epics, and then there are stories. And all of this comes out of a process where we like look at the insights, and one of our head of products, for example, he did like all the interviews on sustainability management over the last year. And so it's not just like one insight he read there or one pain, but it's the abstraction of those pains and the pattern behind those pains. And I think that's where always the nice information lies, also in research, and that's the information you need for strategy, the patterns that you find behind a whole bunch of requirements and actually solutions customers want and the problem you associate behind that. And that's why I think also it is so important that the people that are in the market and do the research are deeply involved in the strategy process, and that it's not like just done by the C-level or the founders or even a strategy department that might come up as soon as you're a bigger company. But it's really, and also not me, because also I am not involved daily with customers anymore. It's really about involving those people in the strategy process that on a daily basis talk to their customers and actually get a gut feeling. And the gut feeling is where also strategy arises from, where opinions arise from.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe just to clarify one more thing, because that's super clear now. When you're saying, hey, this opportunity about making it more sustainable or working in the sustainability space, is this kind of part of the strategy? Is this kind of the strategy driver where I want to work more on the sustainability area, or is this something either higher up or down in the something lower level than this high level topic?
No, actually, it's for us in the strategy level. Why? Because it also has a huge influence on the go-to-market. So since we are not a product-led company where we can sell over the product. So we also, because of the sustainability part, we kind of changed our target market and target group. And that had such a huge influence that it's not only like a product area that you can say, like sustainability management, but for us, this topic really changed on like how we approach the market, who we approach the market, and also, of course, then how we switch kind of the product and where we like continue working on.
That makes sense. I think I will just reflecting back on what you were saying before, these trade-offs that arise from these tensions of the discussions. Okay, do we focus in this space, or what we are saying no to, and all the things that I can totally relate to. Okay, perfect. Now we have, so we're trying to go back to the process you were mentioning before, evaluative, generative. I really love that. So we go to the tensions, we select it, we get what type of insights are we getting for selection. Now we have these ideas, how we continue, or maybe I was going to say my next step will be how we define success and sort of goals we want to set up, but what will be the next phase in this process that you are going through?
Yeah, so right now it's a lot for us about communication, because we're in such a complex domain. And I think this is also something that has a huge influence on our strategy process, that it's a lot about educating the everyone in the company, so they understand why we made those decisions, how they affect the different departments, so they can also think of the execution. What do I need to do in order to do that? And also, beginning of next year, we then as soon as we explained everyone the strategy, where we want to go to, why we want to do that, and how that is connected to the vision, we give it to the head ofs, and the head ofs work on objectives. How can they reach that, and why do they want to reach that? So this is then kind of like the next steps to get out objectives, and then also things they really do, and how we also need to restructure our organization in some parts.
Perfect. And maybe one additional question to that. For this communication, do you have any artifact that is reflecting the strategy, like one pager or a PowerPoint presentation or whatever? Is that a reflective software that is kind of, this is our strategy, this is our strategy?
Yeah, so we also just like we put everything in a structure of like we have strategic pillars. Underneath the strategic pillars, we have opportunities and then initiatives, and we have defined what time frame those have. So an opportunity for us is, for example, a time frame of 2 years that we follow, and then there are initiatives underneath that also have a certain time frame, and that's how we like communicate the strategy, and that also helps then everyone to like say, okay, what can my department do for that? Because a lot of times also for product, we are dependent on go-to-market because some things we need to test on the market, therefore we need to work together, and it really helps to have then an initiative that is owned by both some go-to-market teams and the product teams, so they can work together and really understand, is that working what we're doing? What can we learn while we're doing it? Should we refine the initiative? Should we refine even an opportunity after some time? Yes, I think it's never finished.
Yeah, interesting. So I have two questions from that. The first one is the strategy time horizon. Is this kind of, I mean, I'm imagining already multi-year, but it's kind of very long term, or is also mapping these 2 years that you mentioned for opportunities?
Yes, I think in a startup, for me, like this is also a big learning. Like in the first 2 years in a startup, to be honest, like our vision was a year, and we were happy if a year worked out, and then we adapted it again because we learned, and that's the huge advantage of a startup, because you can still adapt to new learnings, and you still need the learning. So our vision was about a year, and maybe our strategy half a year, and our product planning was maybe 2 sprints. So now we are already way maturer than that, but I would still say it's not that our vision stays for 10 years and that our strategy is done for 3 years. So I would say our strategy and the opportunities that we have stay for like 1.5 years, 2 years, and then we adapt it in between. So it's still something that is more in a short term, and that also gives us flexibility to learn. And we also include a lot of things in our strategy that are learning strategies.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe now that you just mentioned that, a different question is, do you have any sort of formal strategy review in place, or are you planning to have it?
Yes, we are actually planning to have that, because also as a startup in the beginning, the founders make strategy and vision, which is great, because you act in so high uncertainty, and you just need someone who says, yeah, let's go that direction, let's do that, and believes in something and pushes everyone in that direction. But after some time, like the founders are not involved that much anymore, and that's what happens for us more and more. And therefore you need to now have like a process, because before that it was just like, okay, let's talk, and we talk about strategy, but now we like start to have a continuous review. So we differentiate between execution topics and strategy topics, and then every month like sit together again on our strategy, how are we executing on that, and then having like a quarterly review, how are the initiatives going, how are the opportunities going, and matching that on a higher level again.
Perfect. And then now that we explore that path, you mentioned now the phase of communication, but we also discussed a review. What's happening in between to make this strategy more actionable? I feel that you already have opportunities and initiatives, so it's kind of already mapped there. But do you have any sort of either road mapping or OKRs or something that is connecting these things together?
Yeah, absolutely. So for product, we are then working with roadmaps. So the different product areas, they share like strategy. So a strategy might be owned by a couple of product teams. And so they think of like, how can we execute on that? What would the customers need? What would be the roadmap for that? So this is and then we also have OKRs that are matching to the roadmap. So we are working like that in the product, and then in the other teams, it's more department strategies.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. One of the questions I had a bit before in the process, and I'm just coming back to mine, is you have, and I'm super interested on your opinion, given your background, you have these teams doing constant discovery, and this discovery, as you said, can inform the strategy, either refine it or make some learning that can drive a change. What's the process to kind of connect these things together? So we have all these, you mentioned the patterns that the mentioning, but was actually the place where, for example, this product leader coming up with patterns that they understood can bring them back to the strategy or back to the to the C-level or whoever is in that discussion to reflect those learnings. How would that looks like in this case?
So how we do it right now, I'm not sure if this works for like longer term, but we have like our product leadership, which is like me and two head-offs that are responsible for two areas, and we come together and we talk about their new learnings. And as soon as I see, oh, they're coming up a whole bunch of new things and we should like make more new decisions if we should change something, we would take this into the bigger management meeting and talk about the things and revisit things. And this also really depends on like our one product is like in a really early phase and the other one is like already in a mature phase. So for the product in the mature phase, we already know a lot of things. Like this is not that we change like total direction, but in the product that is still in the earlier phase, we need to make faster decisions. And therefore we also like include this head off who's like for the earlier product way more in like strategical questions, because there we still need to like steer again and say, okay, we should change something, and this also needs fast decisions.
Yeah, so the magnitude of learning is bigger or has bigger implications. That makes sense.
Yes.
Still, one question I would have in this space is how you actually so try to say think about how to frame it. But you know, doing research, you have all these tons of insights that are, say, disconnected. Do you have? I mean, and you mentioned product board as a tool, which by the way I'm used, so I know a bit how this is structured. But how do you try to, I call it, map the space or organize the space? Do you have different areas that are out there, and you will, I mean, when having these conversations, will you visualize these areas in which, okay, we're having learnings towards this space or this other space, or how do you kind of divide and conquer all these insights that are coming?
Yeah, so that's already what I a little bit said before. Like for me, it's always important to like structure those insights, at least in our industry, really on our domain. So we more put them on a domain level, like where do the insights come in? Why? Because I always have a problem if you structure product board or like just product board as a tool to whatever, it could be 100 other tools. But if you start structuring things there, like for example, for user stories or with problems, there's already an interpretation in the insight that you got. But the insight a lot of times is just something that came in from sales and we didn't ask the why behind it. So it could just be a feature request. And if I then put it already to, and if I add this already to a problem, then I would already interpret what the why they want this solution. And a lot of times I don't know. So I prefer all of my product managers to structure insights more on a domain. And then as soon as we start researching on something and we have a certain research question, then we jump in and then we might structure the insights differently. But I feel like you shouldn't start doing that too early, because you would change the meaning of an insight. And that's always I see as a danger. I don't know how you have experienced that.
But one follow-up question is, maybe I need an example. That's my follow-up question. Because, I mean, you said the word domain to me, but domain, I feel is a super big box. So if I put insights inside domains, I have hundreds of insights for the same domain, because it's maybe you have domains a bit more split, or how do you...
I think because we're such an expert tool, it's for us, the domains are really clear. It's like invoices, it's like cost controlling, it's like really how also the product is structured a little bit. And I think because the domain is so clear, and they would always, you know, with Alasco, we're going into a process that our customers are also capable of doing without Alasco. So everything is already there, but they would do it with Excel. But so it's not that we like develop something new. There is already a cost controlling, but the way how they do it, the digitalization of it changes and gives them way more value, because you have lifetime data. And because there is already a domain and it's already structured in like certain areas, it's not that we go into something totally new there, but it's pretty clear, and you could always like take insights to a topic really clear.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, this is totally unrelated, but the majority of your users are kind of these controlling / financial people in the industry.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely not people who are not used to digitalization or think if they use Excel, they are really, really digitalized.
Perfect. And maybe also one side question that I think it's interesting, again, due to your background. How do you feel the responsibility of this sort of research or mapping the insights divided between the product manager, let's say the UX designer and the UX researcher? How do you actually work in this set of people to drive the opportunity space?
Yeah, so the opportunity space is for us a lot driven by product management. And not the designer in this case, because I think the question is always, where does the innovation come from in a product? And sometimes the innovation comes from the designer and how they like really manage that. I think in B2C, a lot of times it's really about the design. For us, it's really about understanding the domain and simplifying the topic. So for example, simplifying the invoice process, but not only design-wise, but especially concept-wise. Like, how do you calculate things behind that? It's a lot of like conceptual things that you need to think through. And our designers might not be totally deep, for example, into a calculation of invoices. That's where my product managers most of the times are really the experts in. But of course, as soon as they have understood a domain, they would take in the designers and then they take them into the solution space. But the problem space, a lot of times, not a lot of people can go in because it's such specialized knowledge.
By the way, do you have domain experts, or is the product manager just kind of going deep into the weeds?
Hey, that's really a good question. Like I changed in between during the last 3 years. We didn't first hire domain experts as product managers, but we hired like people with product knowledge. Then it took us a long time to get them onboarded on the topic. Then I started to get people from the domain, so from the construction industry, and try to get them into product management. But to be honest, this is harder than getting product people into construction knowledge. It's harder to get a construction person into product management. Why? Because it's the mindset. And getting another mindset is harder than getting expert knowledge. And that's why I now would always hire for really good product managers. And if they are smart and curious, they get the topic as well.
Got it. Actually, I was going in a different direction, by the way, and maybe this is something that it's worth exploring. But for example, in products I work with that they have a very complex domain, we will have the product manager and someone else who was the domain expert. So for example, in the travel industry, the flights area is quite complex in terms of how you kind of reserve a seat and the other things that can happen in that business process. And we have someone who was kind of a business analyst, sort of, that had the domain expertise and was kind of the consulting role for the product manager as well.
Yeah, we have something like this as a little bit as a partner. So we have customer enablement managers that are like doing the implementation and work with our customers. And each product manager has one customer enablement manager helping him in the expert field.
Okay, interesting. All right. So in terms of how your strategy evolved in this round versus the previous one, you mentioned the process being involving more people and maybe a bit about the time frame that is a bit longer now. Is there any significant difference you see in strategy evolving for startups that we may have not covered?
I think it's just the thing how founders interact with the strategy process and how much they are involved. I think this is something that really changes over time, and that is a learning process, because it's also hard for founders to let go of some things and to understand, like, actually in general, also for me to let go of some things, because me and the founders, we don't talk daily to customers anymore. And before, I was always the expert on every topic because I did the research. So now I need to accept, hey, my knowledge is getting lower, which is fine. But therefore, I also should be more humble and say, okay, I don't know it anymore. I need other people to support me, and I need to ask questions again to my product managers who are involved with our customers. Nevertheless, you also need to find a way that even in management, you are still involved with customers once in a while. So just in general, the process of letting go and changing your role, because every year, no matter what my title was, my role was a complete different one. Just because we were more people. We started off with 20 people and now we are almost 150 people. So of course it changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I was considering is do you have a difference in how you, I mean, we mentioned about this communication and trying to explain people why, which I think makes sense in terms of leading wing context. But in terms of how you manage these product teams, because even for the founders or for you, you become more hands-off, let's put it that way. So maybe what sort of context, I was saying before, kind of what set of goals are you discussing with the teams to enable that room for them for discovery? See how the strategy is kind of communicating in a way that leaves the team empowerment and room for innovation or exploration.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is that they understand the why behind the strategy and what we think of the market right now, because just our product managers also don't have time to like every day think of like what changes on the construction market and what do I don't know higher interest rates mean for their area. So it's more about going into a discussion with them and saying, hey, because of this trend on the market, we believe those things. What do you think? What could that mean for your area? And I think having those conversations with all of them, that helps them really to get in the vision and the bigger picture, and then also being like really making their own decisions in this part of the strategy.
Interesting. And one last question in this direction that you kind of mentioned with this kind of a new product. How do you perceive the strategy of, okay, we have this product that is a bit more mature and we are doing things more, say, we call it stable, maybe that's not the right word, but more mature things versus the one that is more in the expansion side. So do you handle this with, thinking about different time horizons, or how do you manage these two different beasts?
So actually, this was a really interesting thing, like also starting with this, like we had one product, the cost controlling part. And then last year we started off like with a speedboat, we called it. So it was just one product manager with like an engineering team, just like a small startup again. And they also did the go-to-market. So I had a product manager that was also good in sales, and he like tried to sell something and then also like worked with that. And from this like little startup approach that we had, this product now involved that has also 2 product teams in like 1 year. And of course, because this product is a little bit different and it is in a different phase, in the beginning it was harder to get it in like the same rhythm. So we couldn't like they didn't have such a clear roadmap than the other teams. They switched things way more often. But I think now the maturer they get, the closer we get into the same structures, but we didn't force them in the same structures. So this was more something that is natural, and now they are like more asking for it. Hey, how do you do this? Now we have the same problem. We get so many insights. Can we also use product board? And in the beginning, they just structured it the way they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And you see just how they want to get the structures now, because it just makes sense for their daily work.
That's super awesome. That's super, because I mean, I believe that's very smart, because many companies are not doing that and are kind of falling into either the process fallacy or the industrialization fallacy and trying to kind of fit everyone in the same process, the same ways of working, which is smart not to do.
And
especially.
I think if you do this, you hinder innovation. And I think this is something that I also learned from my position before as innovation consultant, when I was in huge corporates, setting up like innovation processes and creating space for people in companies to create new innovations, new ideas, and like just do stuff. I think that's so important to create even something like this in a startup, where you would feel like innovation is always possible, but also there are already processes that might hinder them. Yeah. So I think this needs something that needs to be decided really clear in a company.
That's super nice. Very, very nice. Okay, I think that I have asked a lot of questions and probably everything I had to say, at least for now, but I usually close with the question, what I'm not asking, maybe some learning interesting that you have over these years doing the strategy at Alasco that may be interesting to share.
Yes. So one thing that I'm thinking of a lot, and that also as soon as I start reading, or every time I read a product management book, I a lot of times ask myself, okay, what parts of this are working for me and what parts are not? And then I'm always thinking of, what does our industry, our product make different to others? And one thing I learned or thought of a lot is So one thing pretty obvious, B2B makes a huge difference in a lot of things, how you do it. Also, vertical versus horizontal SaaS makes a huge difference because I feel like if you are a company like Personio, where you have like a whole bunch of different industries that you can approach, your market is way bigger. And for us, with the construction industry only, our market is really small. So we either need to decide in order to grow, we can't go into depth of one topic. We couldn't just stay, for example, with the invoice workflow, just as an example, because the market wouldn't be big enough to scale there. And we couldn't just go for like a really, really specific customer group. So it is really, you need to think differently of how can you grow in a product, and how do you apply that in your strategy process? Because you can't just follow the needs of your customer, because in the end they might even pay for that, but the market might not be big enough. And this is something that has just a huge influence. And before I started at Alasco, I didn't even think of that this might have a huge influence.
That's super interesting. I haven't ever reflected on that, so it's a very, very interesting insight. Thank you. And it's very good. I think that many listeners will appreciate it as well. I would like to close with some rapid fire questions that I usually ask. So one small short question, maybe one short answer, hopefully, if that's okay with you. So it's a very drastic format switch. But if you're up to, I will start with an easy one, I would say. What's an unusual book recommendation you will do for product managers? So not the typical inspired thing, but something that you kind of have there that is not so typical.
So one of my favorite books ever is Radical Candor. And I would also recommend that to every product manager. Why? Because I think every product manager is always in tensions with the different teams in the team, with the engineers, and being there really clear on what are things that you need from other people, like just personally, and what are context topics, and like just building up this trust in your team and also in the company is so important to be successful as product manager. And the basis for everything, therefore, is like trust and cooperation in teams. And that's why I tell everyone in my team, please read Radical Candor. It will help us so much to work together.
Perfect. Yes, that's a very good recommendation. And the second question will be, what's your most useful tool that you're using now for your day-to-day work?
Let me think of it. I think it's Notion.
Nice.
Like our whole company is structured in Notion, like everything we do, and also our product roadmaps, like everything we do is structured in Notion, and it is the tool for so much, which is great and sometimes also not so great. But yeah, I love Notion.
Good, perfect. So that's it from my side. It has been super fun and insightful. So thanks very much for sharing that. Maybe some last message, something that you can share with the audience, where they can find you, or anything that you can share with them.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Nacho, for the invitation. Really love to talk about everything, and was also nice to be so deep into the strategy process and now really think of like what was the process behind it. Nice. Because sometimes you get really deep into stuff. So yeah, everyone can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm also active there. So please reach out to me, Julia Bastian. happy to chat with you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And then thanks again for joining everything, and have a nice rest of the day. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.